Okay, Julius has joined. Julius Gatune for Kenya has joined. And yeah. Julius, how are you doing? It's been a while.
I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. How are you?
Great, great, great.
Hi, Frida.
Excellent. We've already reached 30. So let me just see whether at least we have all the panelists fully linked up. For Ghana, is Professor Texan online? Please shout out if you're online. Then for Tunisia, Dr. Aram Belhaji. If you're online, please shout out. And Dr. Caesar Cello from Zambia. Let me see whether they are in. For the panelists, I think we have, okay, so we have Madam Pamela Nakamba, that's also from Zambia. Thanks for coming and for joining this online event. We already have Nabil Bakati and Mondele Kanfir, so joining. So these are good. We are rising in. Let's just wait for a few more minutes, and then I would briefly introduce the event, and then go over the agenda for the day, and then we can kick off with the opening remarks from the Director General for JICA. Let's see. Professor Uzumi Ono, thanks for joining. Yeah.
So did I hear you?
And Hanatani too has joined, so that's good. Okay, let's, maybe we can kick off, and I'm pretty sure that as we go on, the discussants for the second session, that is the presentation of country-specific briefings, would have all come on board. So let me just quickly start by welcoming all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are. I would just like to say that on behalf of ACET, I would like to welcome you all to this cross-country policy learning event, which is being organized. We're organizing in partnership with JICA to support the preparation of TCAD 8 to be held in Tunis this August. We are particularly honored to have the Director General of JICA with us, and he will be making some opening remarks after my brief introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, with ACET, with support from JICA, undertook analysis of African economic transformation with special focus on growth resilience, underpinned by 6 country case studies in Ghana, Kenya, Mozambique, Rwanda, Tunisia, and Zambia. This analysis was positioned in the context of the Growth with Depth and the ACET's African Transformation Index. The analysis included review of empirical literature, diagnostics, and a new country classification based on economic transformation metrics and resilience. So part of this process, ladies and gentlemen, of generating evidence, the objective of this cross-country policy learning event is to offer a platform for policymakers, experts, business community, civil society, development partners in the 6 country case studies to exchange views and draw lessons from these country case studies to enhance economic transformation and build resilience in their countries. This event is going to answer a few questions, and I'll just highlight a few of them, but notwithstanding that these are just the key areas that we thought the conversation should focus on. I think the first question that we would hope we can answer in this conversation is what lessons and good practices regarding economic resilience and economic transformation can be learned from the experiences and responses to global shocks, such as the global financial crisis, the commodity super cycle, and more recently, the COVID pandemic, and also the ongoing Ukrainian war. I think the second question that we would also like to, broach on and get some insights into is what should economic transformation look like in today's global and continental context with post-pandemic challenges and opportunities. We would like to hear from others about their views about what will be driving economic transformation and what policy choices and interventions are required for African economies at different levels of economic transformation, resilience, and the current ongoing evolution of the demographics, rapid population growth, and the fact that Africa is still not yet began the demographic transition. What challenges and opportunities are countries encountering in transforming their economies, particularly with the population dynamics, as I mentioned. And the last but not the least is what measures are necessary to translate the recommendations that has emerged out of these studies into policies, and what political economy challenges should be overcome to translate these policies into action. We hope that we would get a very lively conversation around these events that would enhance the insights and policy recommendations from the research and provide an opportunity for collective learning from country experiences that would also enrich the NPA documents to be discussed eventually in Tunis in August. We are particularly happy. We now have about 48 people linked into this, which is really good. Earlier on, we had about 40 committed. And I think the distribution so far we have is quite good. All the 6 country case study countries are represented in this online conversation. And we also have participants from US and Japan, of course, in this process. But before I hand over to Mr. Makino Koji, the Director General for JICA, let me quickly go over the agenda for this meeting. I think we all have copies of it, but just to summarize quickly, following the intervention by the Director General, we will then have a presentation by ACET's Research Director, who has led this process from the beginning and continues to provide the technical and analytical guidance for this work, Dr. Roberto Tibana. And he would be focusing on the key findings of the research and perhaps take about 15 to 20 minutes to make his presentation. Then we would have the opportunity in the second session to have presentation from the country-specific findings from all the key countries, Ghana, Kenya, Mozambique, Tunisia, and Zambia. This will be moderated by our colleague, Frida Yosin, who is a senior manager on innovation and digitalization in ACET. There would be a rapporteur, which is Lawrence Asamoah and Mohamed Ture from ACET. Then the third session, we would have discussions by eminent individuals representing various works of life, particularly at the policy level. We're happy to see that we have the Minister of Finance from Tunisia, the Director of Planning from Kenya, and the Director General for Planning and Monitoring from Rwanda, and also the Special Assistant to the Office of the President, Economic Affairs, Investment in Zambia. That certainly would provide us with some very rich insights into the issues that we are trying to address here. Then we'll have a question open session, which will be moderated by Roberto Tibana, who is the research director, after having presented the event, the results of it. And then we would come to a close, during which I would make a short overview. Also, for the day. We have about 2 hours to go. So without much ado, let me hand over to Mr. Makino Kaji, Director General of JICA. Thank you very much for participating in this event. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, moderator, Dr. Brown. Thank you very much. Excellent. You are welcome remark. Thank you. And I'm deeply honored and privileged to make a short introductory remark on behalf of JICA. At the beginning of this meeting today, I'm Makino Koji introduce the DG, Director General of JICA Ogata Research Institute. I have the experience of working in Africa over 10 years. I enjoy very much in Africa at the time. Dear participants, this year 2022 is going to be the crucial year for a relationship between Japan and Africa. It is going to be so in two ways. I'd like to first the focus on TICAT in Tunisia. 4 months time, in late August, we are going to hold 8th edition of the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, so-called TICAT in Tunis, Tunisia. TICAT has been main forum to discuss challenges and opportunities of African development among all stakeholder committed to Africa, including Japan. Since 1993, back then, during the period when the international community was suffering from aid fatigue, after the end of Cold War, Japan exercised strong relationship in launching TICAT and advocated for continued engagement with Africa. Since then, for nearly 30 years, TICAT has been held regularly with a strong support of African countries. In the forthcoming TICAT, we hope to deepen our relationship between Africa and Japan based on our renewed commitment to support prosperous, resilience, and inclusive society and economy of Africa at this extremely challenging time. Second, the year 2022 should be the time where Africa and the world will overcome the COVID-19 crisis and embarks on post-COVID-19 era and beyond. 2 years have passed since COVID-19 began affecting our health, society, and economy. We are deeply concerned. Vaccination is still lagging behind Africa compared to the rest of the world. We cannot say we are fully safe until all countries and people, including those in Africa, are safe. So we will continue to make effort possible to help ensure improve access to vaccination for those who are in need. At the same time, we need to start looking ahead and deliberating the ways and means to rebuild society and economies in a way that is more secure and resilient. As we may be undergoing another round of crisis in the future. That is possible. So it is against this background that JICA initiated this study of NPA in partnership with African Center for Economic Transformation, ACET. It is our view that the COVID-19 pandemic has heightened the necessity and urgency of Africa to accelerate economic transformation to enhance resilience of its economic structure to exogenous economic shocks. The need for transformation for sustained growth in Africa has been called for since the early 2000s, but not much has been achieved since then except for pockets of success. As we have witnessed, the growth in Africa has been backed by a series of external shocks, including global financial crisis and a burst of commodities boom, and not to mention ongoing COVID-19. We now, the world, facing huge another shock caused by Russia-Ukraine war. So these events have revealed primary commodities to remain the backbone of Africa's economic structure, and an industry that produces those commodities have had little synergy with other sectors and a decent job to address a growing youth population and for women. It is therefore our sincere hope through this NPA exercise. Number one, we dig deeper into the question what it will take for Africa to build back better from impact of COVID-19 pandemic and to enhance its economic resilience against the future shocks through economic transformation in the context of current global, continental, and regional trends. Number two, what are the role of various stakeholders, including African government, private sector, and civil society, regional organizations, and international partners to support such an effort? Moreover, we hope event like today this will serve as a good platform for policymakers and the general public in Africa to engage in candid discussion on the future policy necessary for Africa. This is particularly important in light of TICA's spirit, which value African ownership as one of the core principles of engagement. So finally, I'd like to extend my sincere appreciation to the ACET management and its experts, as well as the country team who were engaged in the country case study in 6 countries of Ghana, Kenya, Rwanda, Zambia, Mozambique, and Tunisia for working tirelessly to make today's event possible, as well as the producing country reports. Thank you very much indeed. My deep appreciation is also extended to the policymaker, academia, representative of private sector, and civil society who have provided invaluable input and advice in the course of producing the country report. So today, your extra contribution is much appreciated in advance for enriching the discussion on the future Africa and final product of NPA. Thank you indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director General. I think you have set the stage for this conversation, to continue. And without much ado, let me call on Dr. Roberto Tibana, Director of Research at ACET, to make the presentation on the main findings and recommendations of the report. Roberto, over to you.
Thank you, Ed. I'm going to try and share this. I'm not sure I see all the functionalities for doing that. I'm missing the share button here. Am I allowed to share my?
Yes, Roberto, you're allowed to share your screen.
Yeah, it's here. It's here. It's here. I found it. Sorry. I just hope you can see the presentation now.
Yes, yes. Yes, it's visible, I think.
Right. Thank you. Right. This presentation is going to be very quick because thank you very much, Ed, for the intro, and thank you, Director General Ogata Institute, and thanks and good morning to all participants. All the protocol is observed. We are going to be very quick on this presentation because we would like to leave enough time to ensure that country teams make presentations and that the eminent panelists who are here can provide their input. And this session is particularly a policy learning event. So we give more prominence to the discussions that are going to be stimulated by the interventions of the panelists, high-level panelists who we have here. Let me point out to the 4 or 5 topics that I want to make. I want to make a quick general introduction on methodology that we followed, and then a quick historical context on current mega trends. Some of these issues have been touched upon by the Director General when he spoke. And then I will focus mostly on the recent growth and transformation resilience outcomes, and then discuss the issues, country classifications, which are very important, and then go through some of the recommendations that we have. This research has produced a huge report, 150 plus pages, and we are talking only of the research that has been done by the central team, plus 6 reports that are now final, and we are working on professional editing and final review of them, and at the same time extracting material into this main report. But beyond that, we are now working on filtering all this into the main policy document and policy briefs that are then going to be the main substantive pieces to be discussed at the TCAD conference. So it's a long process. It's coming from huge products that we are trying to filter down, and we cannot pretend that we have made justice to all the contributions that have been provided by the people who have worked with the country teams. Even to the work of the country teams, we feel that when we go to their reports, we still have to extract a lot more material to come in this main report so that it can fit properly into the main document. So please bear up with us if you see some flaws in this. It's still work in progress. Our general approach, as Ed has mentioned, is anchored on the economic transformation concept. That we will mention down what is its main components. And also we try to work some analytical aspects of economic resilience. So what we understand by economic resilience, and in fact, the key point is that economic resilience has various dimensions, and we can only explore some of them. And the one that we have explored, it's on resilience, growth resilience, because of its wide spread implications, the economy. But I was just recently reading a piece, a very interesting piece about fiscal resilience, which is very much linked to economic resilience. So this concept of resilience is brought in here to bear as well in the analysis that we make. And then we try to work country classifications that are slightly more innovative than the existing classifications, which are mostly institutionally based, UN, World Bank, and that mostly tend to focus on guiding these organizations into their operations, how to allocate resources and so on. And we hope also that the kind of economic classification that we come up with, it's going to also help in shaping these resource allocations, but mostly in terms of focusing on what should be the priorities for the countries. And so in this classification, we take into account issues like growth, resilience, vulnerability, and demographic transition and so on, to come to clusters. In addition to the core aspects of economic transformation, we bring all these elements to come to a cluster of countries that have some common characteristics and on which you can come up with sort of common policies for that subset of countries. And the country studies also take the same approach mostly. So our view of economic transformation, it's really what ACET has developed since 2014. Not to mean that it's an exclusive view, not to mean that it's the most perfect and complete view, but it's a very operational concept because it goes beyond the classic structural transformation in terms of shifting resources from one sector to the other to really focus on some dimensions that are important if a country has to make solid, sustainable progress, like diversifying the economy, which is very much in line with the structural, classical structural approach. And this is diversification, not only of production, but also of exports, export competitiveness, in terms of how much the exports of countries are reaching the world and how much the country is making good of the benefits from that to invest in development, productivity, which is very important for growth, in particularly labor productivity, which is the most abundant factor in these countries, and technology, which is critical to flexibility of the economy, to progress in the economy, both in terms of productivity, quality of products, and the ability to diversify the productive activities of the economy. And then human well-being, a very important dimension in which we put factors like employment, factors like gender in terms of female labor participation, both also in terms of income, because income is what actually enables households to really invest in human development by investing in education, health of the children, and well-being of the family. So we have these dimensions that are part of the framework of transformation, which it's not about growth only, but it's about growth with depth, where depth is the initials of all these elements of transformation that I was talking about. Economic resilience for us, it was very important, and we had to find some metrics of it, looking at how much time a country takes to buckle in terms of growth. To falter in terms of growth after being exposed to an exogenous shocks, how much it takes to recover, the extent of loss in growth was focal in this study, how much a country loses in terms of this growth rate once it begins to absorb the impact of the shock, once it's impacted by the shock. And we took the global financial crisis as a natural experiment. But the key point here is that the framework can be used for various kinds of shocks, particularly global shocks, and even domestic shocks. The key point, which is important, being able to identify the transmission mechanisms that go from the shock to the various aspects of the functioning of the economy. And then we looked at the relationship with this vulnerability and economic resilience, because the vulnerability as a natural and even man-made exposure to shocks in terms of the composition of your output, the sectors that dominate in your economy, your exposure to financial flows and so on. It's very important as elements of vulnerability. But policies can neutralize some of the negative effects of that. And so resilience, it's not just a matter of being less vulnerable, but having policies that make the countries able to withstand the shocks and to quickly and strongly recover from those negative shocks. And of course, economic transformation can feed in all this, can reduce your vulnerability, but also it can enhance your resilience. So we brought some of these frameworks to bear into the analysis. And the classification, we looked at the existing classification, but we tried to cluster countries in terms of their performance in the ATI dimensions, in terms of their performance in growth resilience, in vulnerability, and other socioeconomic characteristics like income groupings, fragility and conflict situation, demographic transition, debtor type, geographic size, and level of development. The country case studies have been enumerated: Ghana, Mozambique, Tunisia and Zambia, Rwanda. But we really looked at some of the differences when we were selecting these countries. Some of these countries we've been working on since a number of years now. We discussed with JICA about the selections of these countries, but we try to find some variety, you know, like some of them or most of them are traditional primary commodity exporters, or they have a strong component of primary commodity exports and production in their economies. But also there are countries here where, you know, begin to see some trends for faster growth in services, you know, and countries like Tunisia with manufacturing and integration in global value chains coming in across, and, you know, traditional commodity exporters like Kenya diversifying into services and digitalizing, like Ghana as well, and so on. So we try to pick a variety of circumstances and characteristics of the countries that can enrich this conversation. Now, we also looked at some of these global historical trends or African trends and some global events that shape its development. And this is a long-term picture, you know, starting in the 60s, and you can see the high volatility in the short term, but also the medium-term cycles of the African growth that actually mimic the global cycles, if you want, and if you wanted to really relate it, because most of this is driven by the global business cycle. But also you have some policies and the global context that were behind what we see in that picture, apart from the impact of the global business cycle. Like, for instance, the import substitution industrialization policies of the 60s and 80s that have initial success in the terms of Africa to manufacture, to develop manufacturing, but they failed on account of many factors that we discuss in the report, specific sector industry policies like skills and infrastructure development, but wider macroeconomic policies and fiscal policies that lay behind them, including exchange rate policies that were apparently supportive to industrialization, but that backfired because of the overvaluation of the exchange rates and so on. And then the failure and the crisis that ensued led to macroeconomic stabilization as a response. It led to the global community rethinking how the developing world can move forward, coming up with MDGs first and SDGs next since the 2000s, just to make sure that policies are crafted in a way that focus the countries and reorient fiscal monetary policies and social policies to pro-growth and private sector-led development. And then we have most recently global and regional trends, not all of them recent, but some of them coming from the 60s and 70s that really shaped the envelope that in which Africa is trying to develop. The oil commodity shocks, the debt crisis, the global financial crisis, the Ebola, Asian flu, COVID, all these had implications in the way, in the context in which Africa, but most importantly, climate change, which has affected a lot African continent. Even as Africa, it's not a great contributor to the damage to the environment that results in climatic change. But we suffer quite a lot in hurricanes, floods that have intensified since the 90s, and governments have been struggling to find responses to that, both in terms of technologies, but as well in terms of financing and technical ability to implement climate resilient policies. And then government insecurity, governance insecurity, a serious weakness in institutions, problems of corruption, social unrest leading to coup d'etat and political violence and insurgencies have been some elements that really have weakened the environment for economic transformation, both in terms of the resources that require from the governments, which are diverted from investment in transformative policies, but also in terms of the human tool and capacity that it takes on societies. I've mentioned these megatrends. We have explored various megatrends to see what are the challenges and the opportunities that they bring. Climate change, for instance, the the disruption that it brings to the logistics and the uncertainty that it creates on investment and business development in countries, but also the opportunities that create for instance, in the area of technology, to create technologies to face up to these challenges, particularly in agriculture, but also in industries, to reduce CO2 emissions and face to other climatic change related issues. Well, even in terms of construction technologies, which need to be revisited and reinvented in order to create infrastructure that it's robust to this kind of things. Population growth and urbanization, big challenge in Africa, because of the limited absorption of labor, that it's living high education and college with skills that need to be absorbed by the productive sector, but sometimes those skills are matching, and sometimes are not in numbers that are sufficient. So in terms of the opportunity that this gives, the labor market has to be restructured, institutions have to be reshaped, and particularly have governments to work to intensify the development of skills for jobs, which are going to be required, not only for today, but also for the future, but most importantly, thinking of the importance of not losing on the potential of this huge youth population that is growing in Africa, given our early stages of demographic transition. I would like to not stop much on these items because most of them have been explored also by the countries, and the countries might bring some more evidence on this, on the country perspective. But I just wanted to highlight that we explore also challenges and opportunities on innovation, technology, regional value chains, regional integration, where we think it's very important that countries begin to focus on how the Africa Continental Free Trade Area can be leveraged to address these challenges, for instance, even in terms of creating regional regional value chains that can even create hubs, regional hubs that facilitate the integration of individual countries to global value chains, like, for instance, creating regional buffers for supplies that can help countries to continue to operate even in the context of global disruption to the value chains that, as we saw in the case of COVID. So there are real implications for these trends, mega trends: investment uncertainty, fiscal volatility, and policy timing consistency, long-term versus short-term planning, and we have problems of policy myopia. And as Ed emphasized in his introduction, we have serious problems of political economy. The ability of the countries and the societies to come to a pact where they can agree on common medium and long-term development objectives and transformation. Our take of the recent growth and transformation outcomes, it's very succinct, but it's very clear. We have had an initial period of progress, both in terms of growth as well as in terms of transformation. But transformation was at a very low level. We are working with Africa Transformation Index, which is our metric of growth with depth, and the metric is from 0 to 100. And for the last 20 years, basically the countries have hovered below 40 in this 0 to 100 level. So the level of transformation is really low. And that makes it easy for growth to be also very fragile and easily reversed. And that's what we can see here, both in terms of per capita and in terms of aggregate GDP growth. We have a few disturbing, encouraging trends and a few disturbing trends in terms of the development of various dimensions of growth with depth, particularly good progress on human well-being. The indicator that I stopped and developed a little bit on overall upward trend, which was helped by all those policies of structural adjustment, MDGs, SDGs coming in. The focus on human development and gender was really very much important for this upward trend that you can see in this red line. But we also have some disturbing trends. After an initial progress, for instance, technology upgrading, then started faltering and stagnating, and it's a long-term growth. It's a long-term declining trend. Diversification of production and exports nearly stagnating, and basically stagnating to low to downward trend in almost all the dimensions, which is very disturbing. But another dimension which is very interesting is that, for instance, on technology upgrading, we see that technology, it's up there at a much higher level in the green line, but productivity, it's a much lower level of achievement, which means that there is some disconnect between productivity upgrading, the absorption of productivity in terms of adhering to them, and the capacity to really get more productivity in the economy out of using those technologies. And there are many factors here: skills, infrastructure, electricity supply, and all that, that then disrupt the production process, and management processes and models that can also not be very amenable to good resource use. So this disconnect between progress in productivity, even though the two have downward trend, but in terms of the level, they are quite different. This disconnect between productivity and technology, it's quite worrying. We have ranked these countries, according to the overall indicators of transformation given by our ATI, and Tunisia is a top performer, just at the top there, and it's a very consistent top performer, playing with Swaziland and South Africa there, but Tunisia has a very good performance in almost all the directions of transformation. Tunisia, Eswatini, Morocco, and in terms of countries that come from very low levels of economic transformation, but they really make efforts, and we still have to dig out, and I still regret that we didn't have the Central African Republic as one of the case studies, because this country has rose 21 positions between 2007 and 2018, and we have to figure out what did they do in detail to really make this progress and see really how real it is. So we have this ranking, but the most important for us is not the ranking. The most important for us is the lessons that we can take out from there. Some of the things that we looked at across the countries, and the country presenters may touch on, is sector contributions to economy-wide productivity. And we're talking about labor productivity. Mostly comes from agriculture and services, and little from manufacturing, which might reflect that Africa has really failed to industrialize and make industry manufacturing a driver of the economy, or it's deindustrializing fast, particularly in those countries that try to industrialize. It will be nice to hear from countries talking about that. Also, we find that economy-wide productivity comes mostly from within sector rather than from the movement of resources from less to more productive sectors. This is not necessarily a bad outcome, but it shows that there is still huge potential, untapped potential for growth that can be affected by having policies that promote transfer of resources, labor and others, from low productivity like informal services, agriculture, into most productive sectors like manufacturing and cutting edge services and services that support manufacturing and agriculture. So it is very important that within sector still has to develop. For instance, we still have a lot of development in technologies and productivity within the agriculture sector to make it more productive and even to be able to release more resources to other sectors. So that's not a bad outcome, but we have to consider, and even diversification within the agriculture sector is needed. But it's very important to, as that productivity growth emerges and technology progress emerges from within the agriculture sector, the resources that are released from there find more productive sector activities in other sector services and manufacturing and so on. Economic resilience has been focused more on the growth resilience, but we know we also tackle the issue of how much time a country takes to buckle. That is, once a shock has happened, countries don't immediately fall. It depends on their integration. It depends on their links with the activities or sectors that are the primary origin of the shock. But generally, we find that more than 5 years in African economies against 4 years in non-African economies, it's what it takes for a country to really buckle. That is, for the growth rate to fall below a certain pre-level shock, in this case, pre-level global financial crisis. And then how much time it takes to recover. And within 1 year, most of the countries recover, but up to 4 years can take for some countries to recover. This is within a sample of 24 countries that we have from our ATI database. Economic transformation is good for resilience. This is a very interesting outcome for us. We have lots of scattergrams showing this, that countries that have a better transformation outcome also have suffered less growth from the global financial shock at the time when they buckled. So exactly at the time when they faltered in growth, when it took 3 or 4 years for them to have a reduction in growth, but at the time when they had a fall in growth, as a result or after this shock, how much did they lose? There are countries, low transformers. And by low transformers, we mean those countries that have low transformation outcomes from the transformation ATI index, the ones that you could imagine in the lower bottom of this graph here. So you can slice this graph in 3 parts, and at the lower bottom, these are the low transformers. And you see that these countries can lose up to 12.7 percentage points on average from a shock like the global financial crisis. But then you have countries that can lose up to 4, the middle transformers, and up to 3.4 percentage points of aggregate growth in terms of the high transformers. So there is a huge heterogeneity here, which actually, in terms of the resilience, it tallies with the heterogeneity in their transformation profiles. The classification that we did, therefore, was using the ATI, which gives us a set of countries that are in the group of what we call high transformers: Tunisia, Eswatini, Morocco, South Africa, Mauritius, Lesotho, Namibia. You have middle transformers like Egypt, Gabon, Botswana, Sudan, and Algeria. You have low transformers, which include 21 countries, which mostly the rest of the 35 countries that we have in the ATI. The high transformers jointly performed above average in all the depth dimensions of the ATI, except for human well-being, because they were overtaken by some middle transformers who actually did very well on the human well-being. But these countries would realize more gains, if they can focus more on policies to improve their productivity and human well-being. And we'll come to that. And then you have the middle transformers that really, they jointly perform worse than other clusters in diversification and export competitiveness, and they have technology upgrading that is very far below average and that of the top performers, and they will do very well or better than any other clusters in human well-being. They do that very well, but they need to create the foundations for sustaining that progress in human well-being by focusing on other dimensions. And then you have the low transformers. These countries are very weak in productivity, weakest in all groups, and export competitiveness. They also score very low on human well-being, and like the middle transformers, these countries need to focus on measures that improve productivity and export competitiveness while they're leveraging improvements in human well-being and technology upgrading. And then we mix this clustering with other dimensions, like middle country, middle income, and we came up with a cluster of countries that fall in an economic classification that we call it NPA classification, and we have policies on that. So quickly going through recommendations, we have a set of general recommendations. One is on an industry policy, that we believe that it will be important that countries develop prudent economic and institutional governance to address policy uncertainty and increase intersectoral linkages to promote cross-sector value addition. This policy uncertainty is very important. It's not only because of the shocks that the countries receive. We have read in almost all countries that national development plans are usually a the shocks
Yeah, Roberto, I'm not sure whether it's from my side, but you are frozen somehow. The Roberto interpretation has been, looks like Roberto has fallen out.
Yeah, we lost Roberto.
Yeah, we lost Roberto. He would come back I think he's at the tail end of his presentation. Let's wait for a few minutes and then maybe we can see what the next steps are because I think he's at the recommendation level where he's spelling out some of the key recommendations that might feed into the new policy agenda. These are some of the trials and tribulations of online, events, but also the convenience of bringing lots of people together without any kind of physical movement is an incredible, strong asset. But I think we would be facing some of these challenges, but over time, I'm sure we would not be even talking about this 5 years from now because the level of technology would have expanded to such a level that it becomes normal for us to move on without much interruption. But maybe we would give Roberto the opportunity to come in. We have, he has actually exceeded the time limit. I was quite generous because I thought the presentation was quite enlightening and would set the stage for the country presentation. So I wanted this context to be further deepened, and unfortunately, it's not coming through. So maybe I can then. I think we can continue. We've had much of the presentation from Roberto. The key areas that I think we can all take away is that we have applied the growth with depth framework and seen a very strong relationship between the depth indicators and economic resilience to growth. And that countries that are at higher level of transformation are much more resilient and less vulnerable to external shocks. So given those variables in terms of diversification, export competitiveness, productivity increases, technological upgrading, and of course, human well-being. These are critical variables which I think should find their way into the NPA. And I hope that as we go along, we'll continue to hear a little bit more about that. So without much ado, let me hand over to Frida to introduce the country presenters, and then we can have some interesting presentation from them to further deepen at the country level our understanding of the dynamics that Roberto has just eloquently and presented to us. So Frida, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ed, and good day to everyone. This session, as Ed mentioned, will focus on shedding a little bit more light onto the unique country situations and circumstances. We have a short session. We just have about 35 minutes. And as mentioned before, our distinguished experts have done quite a bit of research. So this has been a task to ask them each to condense their work into just 5 minutes. But we are also very excited to hear from each of them. So it's a pleasure to introduce our researchers. From Ghana, we have Professor Festus Ebo-Turkson, who is a senior researcher at the Institute of Statistical, Social, and Economic Research at the University of Ghana. We also have Dr. Julius Gatune of the African Technology Policy Studies Network, and also a project consultant at the Maastricht School of Management. We have, representing Mozambique, Dr. Lawrence Edua-Samoa, who's a research economist at ACET. From Rwanda, we have Dr. Dixon Malunda, who's the acting director of research at the Institute of Policy Analysis and Research in Rwanda. We also have from Tunisia, Dr. Aram Belhadi, who's a researcher and economics specialist at the Maghreb Economic Forum, and as well a researcher at the University of Carthage. And then last but not least, we have from Zambia, Dr. Cesar Chilo, who's also a research economist at the COMESA Secretariat, as well as the Zambia Institute of Policy Analysis and Research. So we will kick off with Ghana with Professor Turkson. Please go ahead and share your screen. As I mentioned, you have 5 minutes. We look forward to hearing from you. Professor Turkson, over to you.
Thank you, Frida. Just to make a point of correction out of economics of the University of Ghana, just for the, to make it known to participants here. All right, so we contributed to this work, which was very exciting, and we've tried to condense our presentation into 5 minutes, as you said. So I did this work led by Professor Peter Korte, the director of ACET, and then a junior colleague, Dr. Emmanuel Abe. So, I mean, over the last 3 decades, Ghana has gone through lots of development programs. For the 2000s, for instance, we are being directed under the poverty reduction strategies. Then in the 2010s, we moved on to the growth and shared growth and development agenda. And since 2017, we've been running under a program known as the Coordinated Program of Economic and Social Development Policies. Now, over these 3 decades, these programs have resulted in an economy that has followed an expansionary growth path, averaging about 6% yearly. We've seen employment in the service sector dominating, and the service sector being the more significant contributor to GDP. Due to the economic expansion, poverty has also reduced by 50% from almost 56.5% in a need 30%. Industrial sector has played a key role in all of these policies. In fact, Ghana has seen—
Dr. Turkson, are you sharing your screen and moving the slides? Because we only see one slide, which is fixed.
Yes, I have not moved on. So I'm explaining this slide. So I'm just about to move on. So we've seen an industrial sector that has played a prominent role in policymaking, as Ghana has seen over the last decade, for instance, the industrial sector support program. And in just last 3 years, Ghana has now instituted what we call the Ghana 10-point transformation agenda. Now, the problems that Ghana has faced over the last 3 decades has been high poverty and income inequality, especially in the northern parts of Ghana. We've also seen
we're getting
that
some interference. Is that from the French interpreter? Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay. We've also seen at the same time a jobless growth. And the reason why we've seen a jobless growth is that much of our growth, which used to be—
Dr. Turkson, Fred, I'm sorry. I just wanted to see, Roberto joined us and he's slipped out again. I don't know whether he's still online. Maybe we can, after your presentation, we can give him a few minutes just to conclude, and then we go to the next.
Actually, Ed, I was going to say perhaps at the end of the country presentations, if you don't mind, we can summarize everything.
Okay, that's good. Okay.
Yeah, so at the same time, we've seen a situation where there has been jobless growth because of the nature of our transformation process. We've seen agriculture, low productive agriculture giving way to low productive service sector as the leading sector of contribution to GDP. Even then, when youth have found jobs, they found these opportunities in very vulnerable informal sector settings. Now, so all of these were the development challenges that we faced over the last 3 decades. We are just coming out of an IMF recovery program when the pandemic hit us in 2020. Now, the pandemic has brought to fore the fact that we have not built a resilient economy, especially because of the fact that we have limited fiscal space to be able to try as much as possible to contain some of these external shocks. And so we have to at least try as much as possible to begin to transform our economy to the level that would ensure that at least we can transform our economy to build some resilience. Now, over the years, our transformation agenda has been hit with some difficulties. And like I just said to you, labor is moving from low productive agriculture into relatively low productive service sector. If you look at the African Transformation Index, depth, we rank 16th out of 21 countries, and that's a very poor performance. Apart from export competitiveness, where we did well, we rank poor with diversification, productivity, technological upgrading, and human well-being. So the country basically is vulnerable to external shocks because our transformation, just like Ed said, has been very low. And this has posed problems for us in terms of economic recovery. Now, the key lessons out of our study that we found that will be very useful for us to build the resilience that we need, especially from COVID-19 and others, is that one, we need to improve our local capacity for the manufacturing sector. And this is one of the main focus of Ghana's current policy at recovering from the COVID. Under the CARES of Atampa program, there is government attention prioritizing support to light manufacturing. And it's quite key. We need to improve our local capacity to manufacture. And we saw that under the COVID when firms began to manufacture PPE, productive clothing. We also need to promote digitization, and this is what is going on currently, which is good. We need to enhance social protection and build a very effective health system. And over the last 2 years, we've heard the government over the years talk about the Agenda 111 to build a health system. Now, apart from lessons from COVID, there is no doubt that we need to enhance our inclusive growth agenda. We need to modernize agriculture. We need to encourage the youth to move into agriculture.
Dr. Texan, your slides are not moving. You are still on the first introductory page. They are not moving. So can you?
I've moved on. I'm on the last one.
Okay, they're just not showing for some reason.
They're not showing on the screen.
They're not showing?
Please, okay, please go ahead. I'll see if I can share from here. Please go ahead.
Yes, if you can move on to the last one, if you don't mind. Because I'm on the last one, yes. So you can move on to the last one. Yes. So like I was saying, the lessons that we've taken out of the COVID pandemic is the need for us to improve our local capacity for the manufacturing sector. And it's refreshing to know that the government, Ghana Cares About Atampa program, is trying to provide support for light manufacturing. We need to promote digitalization, which is ongoing as we speak. Many government services and other processes are being digitalized to enhance efficiency and cost effectiveness. We need to enhance our social protection and build an effective health system. And currently, as the government has been saying, there's an agenda to build 111 health facilities across the country under the Agenda 111. Apart from the lesson from COVID, we also looked at measures to enhance our inclusive growth, to modernize agriculture, to make agriculture an exciting sector for the youth to get the support from government to move into agricultural modernization. We need to also explore alternative development strategies that will ensure that we build quite some resilience towards some of the external shocks that we face. We need to address social problems, especially we need to focus on skills development and promote macroeconomic stability, which to some extent we've not done too badly until COVID hit us in 2020. Now, on measures to enhance our economic transformation.
I need to ask you to wrap up, please.
I'm wrapping up. So we need to enhance economic transformation by targeting certain specific sectors, and I've mentioned manufacturing. Of course, we need to reduce the structural issues that we have in our economy. We need to be effective with our financial development and increase our skill composition. And we're excited about the free SHS. We are looking that is going to increase skill composition among our youth. Now, to build our economic resilience, we need to strengthen our social protection system. We need to spread our transformation of our manufacturing sector all across the country. And the government's 1D, 1F policy at the moment is geared towards achieving that objective. We need to develop appropriate workforce to target certain industries so that we can attract the global multinationals to come in to add value to what we do here so that we can reduce our reliance on imports and rather seek to achieve export orientation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Turkson. A lot of good lessons for us to learn here. We're going to move quickly to Dr. Julius Gatsune. Over to you. Please go ahead. Roberto, I see you. I'm going to come to you after the country sessions, please.
Thank you, Frida. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Julius. Please go ahead.
Let me see if I can display. Share my slides. Share. You can see it here?
Yes, please put it in slide mode for us.
Okay, fine. I'll do that. We're in slide mode now. They already transitioned for some reason.
Yes.
Let me go back. Okay, so we start. So I'm going to present about on Kenya, the findings. I'm just going to be quite quick. I'm not going to present many things because I think Roberto has covered some of them, but just to highlight some few things. First of all, if we look at Kenya, you can see growth has actually been growing, mainly driven by consumption, and also the key sectors you can see is agriculture and services, and especially transport, hotel and financial. Those are big services, and trade. I think real estate is also quite major. So in a way, even if you look at the consumption, which is basically the key driver of the aggregate demand, it's mostly food and housing. They tend to capture quite a bit, which kind of you can talk of maybe being a bit vulnerable because people, it's really food and housing that is people are kind of spending on. Actually, I think you can talk of it showing some bit of vulnerability. It's the same thing that in terms of looking at growth, you can see it as there has been some kind of a growth. If you look at it more closely, some instabilities in terms of up and down, and low down below shows you that basically this growth, if you disaggregate it, it's mostly driven by services. So services have become a more and more an important growth driver. But although agriculture still remains important, manufacturing industry is not as big driver of growth. If you look at this, I think has been shown looking at the index. As you can see, after an initial rise of ATI, it has basically flattened out and even started deteriorating. And this one, if you look at the various components of the debt, you can see all of them have been deteriorating, and only economic well-being has been moving up. The H part of the debt. Again, reiterating what Roberto has said. And I think if you look at the growth here, just to highlight that we have a Vision 2030 growth vision in Kenya, which has tried to, it started in back in around 2007, but been trying to put growth as 10%. You can see we have never really almost achieved. The highest has gone is around, this is 3-year moving average, but actual growth has at one time reached 8%, but has never really reached 10, which was the growth of Vision 2030. So we are performing in terms of ATI and also in terms of our vision, the Vision 2030 of Kenya. And if you look at the particular reasons, just going deep dive into the depth, if you look at the productivity of the main sectors, you can see, looking at the various periods, 2005 to 2005, going to 2010, 2015, five-year periods, you can see all of them, apart from the initial period, productivity has just gone down. Either it's very small or even gone down. And you can see in the last period, almost all, it's just been negative. So in all sectors, so productivity has not done well. And if you look at the services, which is supposed to be the key driver of growth, you can also see, nothing going good. Apart from some growth in some of the services, I think financial services and some business services have shown some growth of late. But this sector tends to be very small. So even if it has good growth, it doesn't pull too much of the economy because they're very small sectors. Mostly people are in the larger informal sectors. And again, looking at a larger decomposition, which again shows another picture of growth and productivity, most people are in a big share of percentage because it shows the cumulative shares and the growth. You can see, if you look at agriculture, you look at service, transport services, and you look at government services, those are the key main employers. That they go almost 90% of the people. If you add trade services also, it's 90%. But you can see relative growth is even below 1. But the other one, the other sector that has shown quite good growth, they are very small. And you can see business services is really the stellar performer, but not a very small part of the sector. Again, when if it pulls, it cannot be a locomotive or driver. And if you look at structural change, I think also Roberto did show this. Only some change happened in the first period, 2005. After that, deterioration. So you can see there has been movement of labor in terms of looking at some observations here from other agriculture to other sector. However, much of this has been from productive to lower productivity sector, especially trade, informal services. Yes, so structural change has been reversed. And there's still productivity gap, as you can see, huge gap. If we can start moving, if this other sector can try to emulate what we see in business services, you can see there's quite huge potential. If you look at the gap between the well-performing and the low-performing sector. And if you look again, export has also, in the general, exports have been going up, but if you look at the performance going under, you will see that they are very narrow to, if you look at the HS section 2, mostly there. And if you look at the other sections like section 11 and section 15, which has more goods, they very low. We kind of very undiversified exports, and also markets and also products have also been going kind of stagnated. They have not been improved in terms of products, in terms of markets. So the diversification has not happened. And again, also looking at the potential, or even the partners, which are the major partners, Netherlands, let's say Pakistan, and so on, there is huge potential gap in terms of what you can get value and in terms of the market. So that again, some other analysis, which are not shown here, shows that there's a huge gap of the markets that we have that can be expanded in terms of exporting more, doing more value, and in terms of even capturing more of the market share. So huge gap. Again, technology, so very small share of manufactured export. If you look at a comparative country like Pakistan, which is shown to be at the same level of development as Kenya, Pakistan exports 92% of goods are manufactured. Kenya is 52%. And again, if you look at the level of technology, most of the goods are low and middle technology. Very few goods are high technology. So much as we know Kenya is known to be the Silicon Savannah in ICT. So there are some areas where we are seeing very high levels of innovation. But in general, the technology level is low, and exports tend to have very low technology. Again, this is the demographic, the human development. You can see all of them, okay, performance has been good. We are seeing poverty going down, health indicators are all going up, education indicators going up. As we have said, that this is good, but employment has not been good. If you think of ultimately what you want is to provide people with decent jobs and so on, employment has been going down, but it has just, formal sector has collapsed, and what we are seeing is just growth in informal sector.
Julius, could you please wrap up?
Jobs.
Thank you.
So again, macroeconomic indicators have also been deteriorating, and you can see this one, investment is very low. We need at least 25% of GDP, and you can see right now it's quite low compared to what we need to drive. Even savings, the same thing. Credit for private sector is low. So macroeconomic factors are not good. Resilience, you can see, growth up and down, very many vulnerability, political instability, drought, terrorism. Those are big changes in Kenya. If you look at COVID has actually been a challenge, but it also has provided interesting innovations. And you have seen innovations in Kenya, mobile money going up, informal sector starting to better integrate, but has been challenging. Okay. In terms of inequalities has gone down because sometimes some of these innovations have tended to cut some people out of the chain. So and some people could not really go into online and digital. So kind of there has been some observation in inequalities rising. So what does it mean? This is the summary. Growth not creating jobs, I think it's also said in Ghana. Labor reallocation happening in the wrong direction, from low productivity agriculture to low productivity services. Production capability, complexity is lower than peers, high wages, and actually Kenya has very high production costs and high wages, which makes it very uncompetitive. Small sets of exports, we have just said that. What do we need to do? We need innovation, mobilization of the resources. You have been talking of diaspora bonds. Actually, remittances in Kenya seem to have done very well. Even in terms of crisis, global crisis, remittances seem to have always been increased to compensate. So Kenya has actually been not as vulnerable to big crises, like for example, the 2007 global crisis. Remittances seems to be able to save. So there needs to be a way of doing something more. There has been talk of securitization of them to provide the diaspora bond. Also upgrading manufacturing, better integrated with agriculture, thinking more of how to do informal manufacturing. And again, even during COVID, we saw some interesting innovations where some of these informal manufacturers looking for new ways to stay alive have gone to the internet, come up with interesting design, and shown actually they can also use the internet to actually do upgrading. And even there are also some simple technology, automation technology that can be used, and these have been demonstrated. You can actually combine very, very simple automation interfaces. So the opportunity is there, just thinking more carefully about them. And also even providing shared services where they can go and be able to obtain some services that they cannot get on themselves. Leveraging after Africa trade, probably you can start thinking, maybe how can you use Belt and Road Initiative to start bringing some of the Chinese industry that may want to target the Africa market. That Kenya can do that because it is part of the BRI. Forwarding 4IR, we have said there has been interesting ways of, we have seen from COVID that fourth industrial revolution technologies can actually be applied. Better skill matching, that has been said, people cannot find skills. And for those skills, there is a challenge there in terms of building better skills, but also there is a mismatch of skills. People can't find jobs. In terms of resilience, we have seen climate-smart agriculture has been seen as a way to shift towards green and circular economy. Digitalization, again, emphasizing fast-forwarding, 4IR, and also social protection. Those are some of the ways. I think this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julius. Indeed, a lot for us to think about there, but we'll come to that and then we'll come to the questions a little bit later. So for now, let's go to Mozambique. So Dr. Lawrence Asamoah, you are next. Please go ahead and share your screen with us. Great. Lawrence, are you on mute?
Sorry.
When
you look at Mozambique's economy, it has been one of a remarkable one, looking at the growth trajectory of the economy. As it came out as a civil, throughout the civil unrest period, and then it made increased growth from almost as low as a negative to above 7% within the last 2 decades. Until recently, in the last 5 years, where there were some issues with debt crisis that led to a drop, and also the COVID pandemic that affected its growth trajectory. But there's one particular problem with the Mozambique economy that seems to be interesting. When you look at the growth outlook of Mozambique's economy as against its economic transformation path, you can see clear divergence between these two aspects, outcomes. Whilst the growth is moving up or increasing, accelerating, we find transformation to rather decelerating. And this gives us three phases of transformation agenda that has encompassed the economy of Mozambique over the last 2 decades. The first phase, we see less transformative outcome for Mozambique. That's from 2000 to 2009. And then the second phase, which is a short-lived improvement that occurred between 2009 and 2013. And then there's also a third phase where we see deterioration in transformation outcome in the last 5 years. When you go in depth and look at the progresses in the dimension of the economic transformation, you realize there's diversification in production and export has been weak and declining over since 2000. And then basically this is because of the lack of complexity in its export range, and then the narrow range of commodities the country exports, and then its overdependence on the extractive sector. And also the manufacturing sector has fallen since the last 2 decades, below 10%. Also, we also see improvement in the competitiveness, export competitiveness of the country. For over the last 2 decades, as a result of the aluminium smelter project, Mozambique exports has improved tremendously, with exports almost doubling over the last 2 decades. And that has positioned the country among some of the top exporters in Africa. Also, we see declining performance in productivity. Since 2000, Mozambique's productivity has been falling, which is quite a problem, and not only to Mozambique, but also many of the African countries that depend mostly on the natural resource sector. We see agriculture, we'll see the sector contributions as we move on. Also, since 2005, we've seen significant improvement in technological upgrading in Mozambique's exports and production. And these are mostly informed by medium technology manufactured exports. The economy exports quite low on high technology manufacturers as compared to the medium technology exports. We also see a decline in human well-being over the last 10 years. And although Mozambique has made progress over the last 2 decades in transforming, changing poverty direction, reducing poverty over the last 2 decades, but we still see deceleration in especially participation of female in paid employment. And also employment in formal jobs seems to have gone down for over the last 10 years, which is a worry to the economy. Also, when we come here and then decompose the labor productivity change over the last 2 decades, we find that most of the productivity change that was associated with within sector productivity growth between 2000 to 2009 was contributed by that's the within sector productivity that was contributed to aggregate growth. And then within sector, we realized is agriculture that was rather contributing significantly to this within sector growth. And this, when we come all the way to the next, which is the 2009 and then 2018, that's the second 10 years, the last 10 years, you realize there's a decline in this within sector productivity growth. This is as a result of movement of resources from agriculture to other sectors, particularly the services and other sectors in the economy. But we see that when you compare, you realize that the services sector in itself has declined, and then other sectors to the movement of reallocation of labor has declined, meaning that there's still kind of a improvement that has been needed in the level of human capital that's still available in the country to effect this kind of changes in productivity. So when you move in, you realize that productivity gain from structural change moved out from agriculture, which was contributing almost 5.77% to 1.3% in 2018, between 2009 and then 2018, to other sectors. And these sectors were mainly underlined by mining, construction, and utility sector, which grew from 9.95% to 11.41% over the last 2 decades. And then also when you look—
Please conclude for us.
Yes, I'll finish very soon. Also, when you look at the sector employment contributions and then the value addition growth, you realize that trade services and then real estate has been contributing to the sector growth in value addition. But these sectors have the lowest employment in Mozambique. Okay, so what is the way forward? Under resource mobilization, we think the government can strengthen its capacity to leverage digitalization for increasing domestic resource mobilization and then tax compliance. Currently, data from World Bank shows that internet users as a percentage in Mozambique is only 15% as at 2009. So improvement in some of these digitalization efforts can increase the compliance level and then the government capacity to mobilize more revenue. Also, we need to strengthen local capacity system for public expenditure review to support a more efficient and transparent budget. As a result of this debt crisis, it caused quite a lot of problem for Mozambique. So we believe that strengthening this local capacity can, in fact, help the government to reduce its fiscal space problems and then remove non-priority projects from that drain government's revenue. Also, from the agricultural sector, we mechanization and then commercialization to address quantity and then quality of output is very important. And then address infrastructure and logistics challenges for better market access, as constraint to logistics can create business uncertainty and also reduce private sector investment in the country. We also promote agricultural industry linkages to increase agglomeration economies and ready markets for agricultural output. Also, we have skills and then youth and gender employment. Here we argue for relevant skills development like TVET, digital skills, to close the digital skills gap to improve within sector productivity growth, as currently the LNG sector is also ramping up to come online. So some of the specialized skills may be needed to improve employment in the country. And then adopt new industry strategies to nurture existing skills for capacity retention. As it has been said, it's not only the development of this skills that is needed or education policies, but rather we need to nurture the current and existing skills for to be able to match the current job that we have in the country. Also improve doing business environment to help private sector create long-term matching jobs for the rapidly expanding youth population. Mozambique has been performing badly on doing business ranking. It was ranked 138 out of 190 countries as a result of getting issues of getting credits, starting a business, and then enforcing contracts in the country. So we need some of these policies to work in Mozambique to improve the environment. Also, the industrial policy, we need also the country to also invest its natural resource rent to expand competitive modern industries where the country has good job prospects, especially the agro-processing, since majority of the individuals are in the agricultural sector. Bringing on board some of these agro-processing industries can help limit the problems that we have in the agricultural sector. And also areas such as the construction and the real estate sector is also very feasible for investment to increase employment.
Thank you,
also,
sorry.
Sorry.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but we just have about 10 minutes left and 3 more speakers to go. So I hope we can share the slides with everybody and they'll be able to see all the detail.
Yes,
so,
I'll do that.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So, Dr. Malunda, are you here? We have just a few minutes left, so apologies to have to cut your time short. I know everybody has a lot of slides, so I'm just going to ask our remaining 3 presenters to just focus on maybe your top 2 or 3 slides, the challenges of the context, and then your lessons going forward. We will share the slides with everyone. Dr. Malunda, are you ready for us? Over to you.
Yes, I'm ready.
Great, we see your screen.
So much.
But we are getting some interference.
So I'm presenting from Rwanda, and so the top 3 is that. Hello, you can hear me?
There's some interference. We can hear you now. Please put it in slide mode for us. Thank you.
Okay, so the main story of Rwanda's transformation is one of 3 stages, growing from the genocide, post-genocide period, where growth over the last 18 years grown at about 7%, declining by 3.4%, COVID, and then kind of recovering post-COVID. So what has driven most of the transformation we see in Rwanda? It's mainly human capital development and a bit of diversification in economic activities and structural transformation. What is lagging behind? Technology upgrading, especially in the manufacturing sector, hasn't progressed so well. Okay, so what was behind the successes that we see in Rwanda? So one was in the first poverty reduction strategy was the exports pillar of the Vision 2021, which emphasized agro-processing, ICT, and that's a crucial one that Rwanda has really developed. That is in ICT. So we've seen the transfer of the structure economy from agriculture towards services, and mainly driven by investments in ICT. So Rwanda aims to become a service-based economy. And then what has played a key role again there is investments in tourism, especially MICE, hotels, and Rwanda Air and the convention centers, basically attracting tourists for meetings, incentives, conferences, and exhibition. So the first phase, we had accelerated transformation. The second phase grew but is slightly reducing, and we see a reduction in the third phase, which is exacerbated by agricultural volatility in agricultural commodity markets and the COVID-19. Okay, so what lessons have driven the transformation and the resilience we've seen in Rwanda? One, transformation has leaned on effective formulation, and not only formulation of medium and long-term plans, but also implementation. That is a key thing that has happened in Rwanda. The policies are implemented, there is follow through with performance contracts, and I think, and it's backed by investments, especially the long-term development plan, which was clearly articulated to get a service-driven economy driven by MICE. It has been followed up by investments in hotels, in Rwanda Air, in a Kigali arena, all which have been attracting tourists. Then reforms to the public sector were crucial to the success in Rwanda, where we had a period of improvements in health and well-being, but also trying to attract the right skills and digitize the system. So efficiency, especially productivity, has been driven more by digitizing. So we have where there's a lot of drive for digitization which is coming from above. The third, effective to achieve that for Rwanda. So Rwanda has investors. And most important, lastly, but not least, political will, where there's accountability with performance contracts and monitoring, which are enforced on annual basis. Okay, so what are the remaining challenges in Rwanda's transformation trajectory? Agricultural productivity, given the small land sizes, prolonged droughts, and climate change, of course. Then in terms of labor, we see mismatches in skill demanded by the employers with those demanded by the industry. Of course, there are structural challenges in the labor markets. More graduates are getting into the market than more jobs, less jobs are being created. Labor supply outstrips demand. Of course, there are productivity, industrial productivity constraints, the power, the cost of power and water, and then limitations of accessing finance. How has Rwanda responded to the COVID-19 and the shock? So there has been an economic recovery fund where businesses are given soft loans, which they repay. There's been into the health sector to strengthen the health system in the wake of the COVID. And then there's the manufacture to build program, which is mainly targeting the construction and manufacturing industry. So here, there are tax incentives, reducing costs of setting up industries, expansion or VAT taxes exemptions. And the manufacture to rebuild, recover program is complementing the economic recovery fund. And as Roberto talked about, there's the Made in Rwanda policy, which is basically input substitution. Basically, they're recapturing the domestic market, which is also being done, in addition to investments in the public infrastructure. Okay, so what are the key, what are post-pandemic, going forward, what is being faced by governments and the households? So reduction in domestic mobilization, that is taxes are reducing, and it means that some of the national development priorities and targets have to be reset. Then, of course, the worsening fiscal position, which has again been mentioned by Roberto, with debt, first of all, for infrastructure, but also debt due to the shock of the COVID-19. And then there was also a risk of economic scarring. So temporary stoppages in education, temporary stoppages in employment, getting there. And then that came with COVID and reverses in the gains made in poverty reduction. So the other challenge going forward is when Rwanda with effort to recover, how can we make a recovery inclusive? So with economic recovery and growth, how can we make sure that no one is left behind? That is one thing that has to be catered for. Okay, what do we recommend? We recommend an inclusive and resilient development fund. In addition to the temporary measures that have been done with the Economic Recovery Fund, these should be an inclusive, and we mentioned the term not only resilient, but we want resilient recovery to be resilient, but also inclusive, not to leave behind the poor. So to help micro enterprises, and in addition, diversifying. There was so much emphasis on tourism and MICE and the service sector, but we think we need to add more sectors for prioritizing, like e-commerce, like pharmaceuticals and vaccine manufacturing. And then minimum wage, again, minimum wage for low-income workers to make recovery inclusive, expanding the current manufacture to rebuild scheme to have additional sectors beyond the manufacturing and the construction.
Thank you, Dr. Malunda. Please conclude.
And then tax incentives. That is about it from Rwanda. Thank you. I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Malunda. I know it was tough to put everything in there together, but I think it was a good overview of what some of the lessons were and some recommendations that we can take forward. Okay, so thank you. Next, I'm going to come to Tunisia. So Dr. Aram Belhadi, are you there?
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Okay. You see the
Yeah,
slide?
3 slides if you can make it.
Yes. Okay.
We can see your slides. Yes, great. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you, Freda. First of all, I would like to express my happiness and pleasure for being part of this interesting evening. Well, to go straight away, let me say that Tunisia growth and economic transformation context over the last 20 years can be divided in 2 main periods. From 2000 to 2010, this period was characterized by a non-transformative and non-inclusive growth, while the last decade, 2011-2021, coincided with an absence or weakness of growth. If we'd like to go deep, I can say that basically during the 10th plan, it means from 2002 to 2006, GDP growth was linked to good performance of few main sectors, notably agriculture, mining, and tourism. During the 11th plan, it means from 2007 and to 2011, the decline of GDP growth was a natural consequence of a combination of internal as well as external factors. And finally, the last decades was characterized, as I say, by the absence or weakness of growth, and it was the result of political economy consideration. It means political instability, bad governance, absence of structural reform, etc. It is useful to note that during the 2000 decade, merchant services had the primary role, with the contribution in economic growth reaching an average of 45.6%, followed by non-market services and manufacturing industry. However, during the last decade, there was a change in the contribution of every sector in the economic growth. Indeed, the sector of non-market services took over with a contribution valued at 17.9% on average, followed by agriculture. Well, in Tunisia, the progression pace of labor productivity continued to decline throughout the last 2 decades in all sectors except agriculture. On the other hand, the growth in the labor productivity was achieved through an intra-sectoral instead of inter-sectoral one, as specified by Roberto, and this was the result of the absence of structural reforms. Moreover, the decomposition of sectoral total factor productivity shows that the continual decrease in growth in Tunisia was the result of a decline in technological progress in all sectors except agriculture. So clearly, even in episodes where economies succeed to growth, this growth lacks depth. Depth means, as brilliantly presented by Roberto, diversification, export competitiveness, productivity, technology, and human well-being. Well, while examining the main vulnerabilities of the Tunisian economy, 4 types of risks were identified. The economic risks related mainly to trade and globalization, climate, environmental and natural resources stress. A third vulnerability is the population dynamics and social inequality, and the last one linked to technological changes. However, the key challenges Tunisia needs to confront are to address these vulnerabilities and achieve a resilient economy linked to the following issue. The first one is the fiscal space. The second one is infrastructure. The third one is economic liberalization. And the final one is human capital. Well, finally, the key measure that should be adopted to help bring the Tunisian economy back on the track include First of all, the implementation of an equilibrated governance between economic rights given in the Constitution and the necessary sources of revenue. Second, a new organization of public powers in economic matters between the government and the central bank, the fiscal administration, and corporation. Third, the rising of the support capacity of the Tunisian diaspora for the economy. Fourth, the transformation of many sectors, notably the tourism sector. Five, the relocation of a part of the value chain, or at least the reposition of these value chain. Six, the long-term commitment toward the green economy plan. Seven, the reinforcement of ecosystem innovation in order to attract foreign investors and to benefit from money flows from abroad. And finally, the acceleration of the investment piece in the human capital and innovation, with special focus on linking research and development activities. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Very succinct, much appreciated, Dr. Belhadi. And so finally, we will come to Zambia. So let me see if Dr. Chilo, are you there? Hello, Dr. Chilo.
Hi, I'm here, but Pamela was meant to make the presentation.
Okay, all right. Please let them go ahead and share their screen.
Okay. Yes, this is Pamela. I'm just trying to see if I can share my screen.
Would you like me to share your presentation?
I don't know whether I've managed.
Yes, yes, it is sharing. Okay, great.
Okay, let me see. How do I get to her?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Pamela, one of the people who worked on the Zambia country case study, and I'll be doing the presentation today. Zambia is one of the African countries which entered the 21st century with accelerated economic growth. You will notice from the slide here that there was sustained real GDP growth and as well as per capita real GDP growth over the period 2000 to 2010. But afterwards, for the period 2011 to 2019, growth weakened markedly, turning negative by 2020, of course, due to COVID. And this decline in growth was underpinned by a mix of exogenous shocks, as well as persistent domestic failures, which this study has tabulated in detail. I won't go through that due to the interest in time. On the flip side, we see also that poverty and inequality are still significant challenges, especially rural poverty. And in terms of the employment and unemployment, over female youth, particularly female urban youth unemployment rates have risen over the period 2007 to 2020. The report has shown this data, and therefore you find that the jobs and economic transformation agenda clearly needs strong and active champions in Zambia. But how have we performed on the economic transformation front? On economic diversification, we started on a high, but this notably declined. On export competitiveness and productivity, these have been stagnant at low levels with a marginally declining trend. Technology upgrade, this has seen the most remarkable progress among all the depth indicators. Human well-being, on the other hand, have shown gradual improvements, albeit at relative lower levels when you compare this with diversification. Overall, what we see for Zambia is that there's been a weak record of economic transformation throughout the period, and therefore Zambia finds itself in the low performers. And this means that there are significant economic resilient risks. And these resilient economic risks which abound come from the macroeconomic policy risks, which have remained high by the end of 2020. This is largely due to a large debt overhang. Zambia also has remained highly susceptible to exogenous commodity price shocks due to highly dependence on one commodity for export. There are also threats around the demographic transition. Increasingly, a young population. Zambia has quite a very young population, and therefore without significant investments in education and health, this is likely to be a demographic debt rather than a dividend. Zambia also has remained vulnerable to climate change-related shocks such as frequent droughts and high temperatures. Further, public institutional weakening over time due to political interferences, political elite capture, social vices such as tribalism have eroded good governance and professionalism. Now, given this picture, therefore, what we've learned as we were conducting this study is that there have been weaknesses in the processes of formulating national development plans, which has led to the patterns we are seeing so far, both on the growth front as well as the transformation front. So we're saying Zambia actually not only faces the growth challenge, it also faces an economic transformation challenge as well as an economic resilience challenge. And therefore, what we require is a return to knowledge-driven, evidence-based priority setting and public spending investment choices, also, as well as a renewed attention to coherence, credibility, and consistency in the implementation of these national development plans and strategies. And because we have also seen a weakening of private sector capacity, productive capacity, we are saying that there should be an establishment of government-led private sector development programs that identify and prioritize economic growth driver sectors. Further, the strengthening of key legal and regulatory frameworks to insulate public institutions from undue influence as well as discretion, because we have learned also that there's been a weakening of public sector productive capacities as well as political interferences and resistance in the private sector to economic reform. I mean the public sector to economic reforms. And we also learned that we need to return to business and competitive reforms similar to those which were pursued during those periods when we saw sustained real GDP growth rates. In order to improve productive capacity for both the private sector and the public sector, we need to establish data, information, and knowledge systems. And then overall, since we also
please wrap up for me. Thank you.
Okay, I'm done. So the last one is just showing what we need to do to be resilient to external shocks in the light of COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pamela, and we appreciate you wrapping up quickly. We will, in the interest of time, we're going to move forward just very quickly. I can see that, there are a number of issues here across the board. We have, cross-cutting lessons in terms of policy setting and formulation, in terms of implementation, whether it's through accountability or building civil service capacity, There are opportunities in resource mobilization, working with the public and private sector. And across the depth elements, we see, although that countries are at different areas, there are generally challenges, especially with export competitiveness, productivity, manufacturing in the agricultural sector, and skills. So Roberto, I'm just going to give you another 5 minutes to finally wrap up your recommendations. And those last, tell us what you think we should be looking at as we go forward. And then I think that would be a great opportunity for our panelists to then jump in and respond. So Roberto, when you are ready, please share with us your final recommendation.
Roberto, you are mute.
Am I here audible now?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Yes, I was saying that, you know, I'm very shy of coming back again. I've shared a presentation and I'm very eager to hear from the ministers and directors, senior government officers who are here. So I'm still trying to sort of say, you know, it's probably useful to go on to that. But if you insist, I can wrap up my last couple of slides. I mean, I was working on this. Go ahead.
We can move on, and perhaps you can interject in the panel session.
Okay, when you feel like I'm taking too much time. Am I sharing now?
No, Roberto,
am I sharing now? Yes.
Roberto, my suggestion would be that, as you rightly said, let's move on to the panel discussion. We have clearly huge slippage in time, and maybe we can indulge all the participants to stay on till about 12:30 to offer an opportunity for this wrap up. And at that point, you can also then make some few observations.
I agree.
Okay. So without much ado, let me quickly come in to introduce the 4 panelists who we were fortunate to have. We have the Minister of Finance from Tunisia, Ms. Chiam Boudiri Nemesia, who is going to give us her observations on the presentation so far. And then we have Mr. James Maina, Director of Planning, State Department of Planning in Kenya. And then from Rwanda, we have Jonas Munyarang Gabo, Director General for Planning and Monitoring and Evaluation, Minister of Trade and Industry from Rwanda. And Mr. Jito Kayumba, Special Assistant to the President's Economic Affairs in charge of investment in Zambia. These are very appropriate and I think well-aligned people that we have been able to invite to this conversation. So without much ado, let me offer the Minister of Finance in Tunisia the space to offer some of her observations regarding the discussion so far. Let's try and fit this into about 3 to 4 minutes observations, and then we can have questions and answers because we haven't even given the audience any opportunity to pose questions. So about 3 to 4 minutes from each of the panelists. Over to you, Ms. Nemesia. Is she online? Let me see. It looks like Madam Nemesia is not online. Okay, while we wait for that, can we quickly go on to Kenya and have James Maina make some observations? Over to you, James.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And on account of time, just appreciate the fact that they have been having some very good presentations. I will look at Kenya's context, and I think I'll start from some background so that we are able to appreciate where we are coming from. And I would wish to note that Kenya's planning dates back to pre-independence in what we consider to be the Oliver Lytton Constitution of 1954 that formed the Ministry of Finance and Development. And thereafter, we have seen, consistent 5-year plans evolving over time until 63 when we gained independence. And after that, we have adopted different strategies to fit the different goals and agenda. But more importantly, it's important to note that in 1965, Kenya adopted the session number 10 of 1965 that focused on African socialism and its application to Kenya, which marked a very big step for Kenya's attempt at sustainable development. We have seen several attempts at development, and between 1965 and possibly 1999, when we had the first to 8 development plans. And in 1999, there was the formation of the 9th development plan, and this also coincided with what we recall was considered also driven by the World Bank and the IMF, the poverty reduction strategy paper. They came concurrently during the same period, but worth noting is that both of them were never implemented as they were set. Because during that period, there were also some changeover in governance. And the government that came in 2002 thought it wise to move away from focusing on poverty, rather than that we do move to the core issues that are going to address poverty and well-being. And therefore, we came to refocusing and retargeting. And this time we came up with the economic recovery strategy for wealth and employment creation, targeting on 2 facets of wealth creation and employment creation, both of them addressing poverty and unemployment, and of course, by creating wealth. And that was to take us through 2003 to 2007 with a very good performance economic-wise and also in other sectors. And during this period, we were also thinking through what is it that Kenya was to adopt in terms of long-term development planning. And it is during that time that we thought about and configured and designed the longer-term development blueprint, the Vision 2030. And this was to take us between 2008 to 2030. And it has been quite supported by different tenets. One of them is the Constitution of Kenya 2010, which reinforces policy and legal basis of sustainable development. And this was to be implemented by 5 years development plans. We're starting with the first development plan or medium-term plan for 2008 to 2012. And it is a series of, it was the first in a series of 5 years plans. And we note that it identified key policies and actions and reforms and programs that by then we had what were called the Grand Coalition had identified with. It adopted the theme, a globally competitive and prosperous Kenya, basically to take us to start the journey to taking us to middle income status.
Mr. James Minor, we are, I think we've exceeded the 4 minutes, but I'll give you a few more minutes to wrap up, but perhaps you might want to focus on just 1 or 2 policy measures that your country adopted to transform the economy. Just highlight those key issues and that will help us. Please.
Okay, perhaps then I'll move fast forward to beyond the first and second plans for the Vision 2030 and come to the third one, which focused on 4 main areas and drivers. And these 4 main areas targeted what would be considered to be drivers, especially the food and nutritional security. And this was targeting to enhance productivity in agriculture. It also looked at the issue of health resilience focusing on healthcare, or what we are referring to universal health coverage, and of course, aspect of manufacturing to enhance investment and promote, and especially the agro-processing to enhance productivity and of course, competitiveness, and of course, the aspect of affordable housing. At the moment, we do discover that the pandemic, COVID pandemic came just when we were almost finishing the third medium-term plan. And as we plan to form the next medium-term plan, for the medium-term plan, which is already underway, we look at the theme that can fit resilience building and recovery. And we have adopted the theme accelerating socioeconomic transformation to more competitive, inclusive, and resilient society economy. We will be focusing on basically the driving economic recovery and sustainable growth trajectory, strengthening macroeconomic resilience, so that we can refocus on what was the target for the vision, 10%. Of course, we are looking at the next 5 years retaining or going to 9.2%, moving to improving economic fundamentals that can strengthen robust domestic demand, diversification of economic base, improving domestic savings and increasing investment, and of course, looking at sustainable fiscal position while also managing inflation and monitoring sound financial systems in order to enhance resilience. This is built on what best practices have been adopted from the third medium-term plan. And as key sectors, the bridging, especially the bridging digitalified to promote innovation and creativity by adopting more of ICT infrastructure, the high-speed broadband at ETC. And they're also looking at how we can promote the business outsourcing.
Mr. James, we would have the opportunity for you to respond to some of those, the questions when we open the floor for others to come in. So if you can just quickly wrap it up, in a few seconds, please.
Thank you so much. Just note that as we move into now the next 5 years, we'll be looking at enhancing inclusiveness and building equitable society as a commitment to enable all citizens participate in the benefit of country's prosperity. I think I'll stop there, then perhaps I could respond.
Thank you so much. I think you have highlighted some key issues and strategies that the government is adopting. As I said, we'll have the opportunity to go over some of these questions as we open the floor for questions from other participants to this event. Let me quickly move to Rwanda and ask Jonas Munyaram Gabo, Director General for Planning, to make a few observations. And for Rwanda, I would just want you to focus on the policies and measures that your country has adopted to transform the economy to make it resilient to global shocks. Just briefly on that, and also, talk a little bit about how the country is addressing the challenges of the resource stress, climate change, and the vagaries of international commodity markets. So just briefly on those two questions, I think if you can provide us with that, then we can move on to. So I'll give you just about another 4 minutes. Just be succinct in terms of the key areas. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me and probably see me on video. Yes, straightforward to the point. Rwanda, as you know, is a country that took it serious as far as COVID containing measures is concerned. However, this sector, as well as economic growth, kind of accelerate that we were. As of today, we got a GDP growth of 10, double-digit growth, thanks to the following policy decisions that were made. Number one is the Economic Recovery Plan, which had also the Economic Recovery Fund, which was implemented, and we are about to launch also the second phase of the Economic Recovery Fund, which has helped in funding the recovery of the private sector in different sectors, including tourism. You know that tourism has been heavily affected by COVID, and we are seeing, yes, a slow recovery, but at least there have been support to hotel industry and hospitality, as well as SMEs and working capital for manufacturers, but also traders in general. In terms of course, what are the measures again to face the future shocks in terms of health? There have been a lot of investment in the health sector, and you know that currently Rwanda is one of the countries in Africa that is establishing the vaccine manufacturing plant, and we are ahead of really making it operational by end of this fiscal year, this calendar year. And of course, in terms of global shocks, global commodities, we keep monitoring, and you know the inflationary prices, rates that have impacted the global economy due to the logistics issues. This is something that we still monitor, and in terms of serving as investing a lot in the infrastructure and logistics chains, and making sure that we are connected to different markets, including the alternative market, especially for the must-have product. And these are the the product that have been identified in Rwanda as the must-have product that we need to invest in the country in terms of production, but also understanding the alternative market in case the existing market are affected. So, and this is one of the policy of the Made in Rwanda that is trying really to understand how we could collaborate and tap into regional and global value chain as we add value to what is imported elsewhere and fix and the supply. So I will stop from there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I think you've presented quite a succinct overview of what policies the Rwandan government is embarking on to build resilience and build forward better. Let's go to the third panelist for Zambia, Mr. Jito Kayumba. I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. Zambia, over the last first decade of the 2000s, was one of the growth acceleration, followed by reversals following the global financial crisis. And at the end of the commodity cycle, and recently the COVID epidemic. Can you tell us a little bit about the traditional, as a traditional primary product exporter, what policies and measures did your government adopt to transform the economy to make it more resilient to global shocks? The global financial crisis and the COVID pandemic. And then the second question I would just like you to broach on quickly is on the area of digitalization of the economy, which you've made some good progress in. But there are still challenges, in particular in skills, entrepreneurship, access, and utilization. So what avenues are being explored to address these gaps? So those are the two questions. If you can quickly, give us a summary of the policies the government is adopting. Thank you. Mr. Jito, I saw you earlier. Are you still on? It looks like Mr. Jito has fallen out. Let's see again. Okay, let's continue because we don't have much time. Let me hand over to Roberto, who would be moderating the open questions that will be directed to any of the panelists or any of us who are organizing this event. So over to you, Roberto. And I think you can perhaps quickly also, if you want to summarize your presentation, you can also do that.
No, I will not summarize the presentation. I will just ask, I opened the window here for questions. And because of my internet interruptions, I don't see any, which means that when I was being cut, I was losing questions probably. So I will ask for your indulgence. Those who have posted questions, which I don't have here because my window is blank, could please take the floor and ask any questions or make any comments that you might want to make. And I will also be monitoring the hand, the electronic hand, and see what it's coming up. And if my internet betrays me again, my colleagues will take over and continue with this session. There is a question that has been posted that it went to Frida, but she captured it and she's posted it here, and it's directed to Pamela. And it's to what extent have the findings that we have presented here influenced the content of the 8th National Development Plan? That is, this kind of analysis, is it filtering into actual policy making? This is a very important question, because when we put all these papers that you are writing and the papers that we have wrote, and we put all this stuff into peer review internally and externally, the big question that is being addressed to us is, what is actually new in this new policy agenda that you are developing? I mean, and I would like people to start focusing on that, because I think this is one of the big gaps that we have. What is actually new? And what are the things that we believe that have been there on the table that may have not taken much attention from government? So talking about the research that you did, to what extent this has influenced the National Development Plan, Pamela? That's a question for Pamela.
Roberto, if I may, Pamela might have stepped.
Yes, you may. Yes, you may come in, Kaiser. You are colleagues and partners in this.
Sure. So very quickly, I think we had a national validation workshop in March, where the draft of the report was disseminated to key national stakeholders, including the Ministry of Finance and National Planning. And as part of their reaction, they actually asked for the report to be resubmitted to them. We had circulated it in advance, and also for the PowerPoint to be circulated to them for internal use only. And the main thing that they wanted was to tease out any insights that would be useful for them, which were perhaps missed in the 8 NDP, because at the time we were having the validation workshop, the colleagues at the ministry were actually doing the final run through for the whole month of March. They were at a retreat, so doing the run through to update and finalize the 8 NDP. So I'm fairly confident that a lot of material and insight from the report made it in. Granted, we haven't done any sort of review to see how much exactly was taken up. But typical examples of immediate reactions that they had was an admission from the colleagues at the ministry that, for instance, evidence-based priority setting had weakened over the years, and that's something that they were taking away, that they needed to use more evidence, thinking about transformation and thinking about where the bottlenecks to transformation in Zambia are and things like that, and working with the colleagues at Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry. So great hope there, Roberto. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't see a hand, and I still don't see questions there. Yeah. There was a suggestion for
there is a hand, Roberto, there's a hand, James Minor.
James Minor, please come in.
Thank you so much. Perhaps I just needed some clarity in terms of adoption of depth as defined to what extent would we say that it has been applied across countries? And is it a standard applied also across the globe, across all the nations? So that, because it brings in an aspect that nations would wish to pick from at least to see when defining development. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. I think that's a good question for Ed to take up.
Yeah, I think, in fact, I was going to make a plea for that in my closing remarks, because one of the things that is clear from all these country case studies, using the growth with depth framework, the indicators shows that practically almost all countries since 2010, thereabout, that these indicators have been declining, but differently across the countries. But certainly they've all not performed very well on these growth indicators, I mean the depth indicators. And I would mention a little bit about that later on. But the point I want to make here is that I think this methodology or this framework offers a powerful analytical framework to really direct policy to what matters for economic transformation. The indicators we have there are clearly in outcome indicators. It is not policy interventions and so on, but the outcome. Diversification, it's clear if an economy is diversified, what it means. And we have an analytical construct for diversification. The extent to which manufacturing value add is increasing, or the extent to which the service sector, particularly the formal sector, is increasing, and therefore diversifying the economy away from primary producers, production. The importance of export competitiveness. Now, if policies are directed at those indicators, we would begin to move the needle. I'll talk a little bit about that. After we finish this session, just to wrap up, I just wanted to emphasize that because I think you've made a very important observation that if we can all begin to shift our mind to use the growth with depth framework, it offers us a powerful policy tool to begin to influence economic transformation in the countries. I'll stop here for the moment. There's a hand from Professor Texon.
There's a hand from Ebo Tucson.
Yes.
Please.
Yes, I wanted to emphasize the point on diversification. I think Ed later on mentioned it, that we should look at diversification to higher value addition rather than diversifying to other primary products. I've heard time again when politicians or managers of the economy have been excited because we diversify possibly from cocoa to cashew and all of that. I think the emphasis on the issue with diversification to higher value addition, that's what Africa needs. And so we need to emphasize that and not just diversify into other primary products. We tend to have the same problems we have with our traditional export. I think that should be made very important. Thank you.
It's a very important observation, and I'm not going to comment further on it, but we will take note of it to emphasize it in future writings. What Peter Corte is asking to everyone, what opportunities does COVID present, and how have countries taken advantage of it? Peter, you were one of the researchers for Ghana. You were lead researcher for Ghana. Before we ask other people to ask, can you give your own take if you were to answer that question in the case of Ghana, just in 30 seconds, before we give it to the floor? Julius is next on the floor. Are you here, Peter?
Is he gone?
It doesn't seem to be here. Oh.
Peter is.
I will not be able to.
Hello.
Yeah, Peter is here.
Yeah, I was muted, so I couldn't speak. You couldn't hear me.
Yes, he's there, but I don't think he made a panelist. So
yes, if you can hear me, I think in the case of Ghana, we've realized the need for digital technology That's one prospect COVID-19 has taught us, that digitalization is the key. So you could pay revenue, government revenue online. You can carry on economic activities online. Businesses can move some of the activities online. Even education, a lot of them can be done online. So it provides prospects in terms of deepening our digitalization agenda through improved technology. That's one key area we have seen. Then also agriculture. Agric transformation is very key. During COVID, we saw during lockdowns, for instance, food and other commodities couldn't move. But if your country's agriculture is resilient, you are food sufficient, then you could easily cope for a while if you don't have to import food items. So these are some of the advantages or prospects COVID has taught us.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks a lot. Julius.
If I could add to what Peter said on the Ghana case.
Okay.
I think what we also found was that we need to support our local industries to move into manufacturing. I mean, we noticed the support that government gave, the priority that government gave to our local industries to produce the PPEs, and they were very successful at doing that. So it means that if we want to target certain industries in the manufacturing sector to be able to produce some of the goods that we import, or we give them the right support, our local capacity is enough for us to be adding value to our products. And it's important that we focus. COVID taught the government that let's give our support to these firms, local firms, for them to produce, and they were able to do that. So that is one of the key takeaways from COVID, that with the right support, our local capacity is enough for us to move into our value addition, especially in agro processing and other manufacturing sectors. Simple.
Thank you. Thank you, Turkson.
Something then.
I don't know whether I have been cut off the internet, but
Julius is online.
Julius, quickly, so that we can give it to the floor. Yeah.
Okay. So for me, what COVID did was actually, apart from what have been said, obviously, it accelerated digitalization. But more importantly, it opened new perspectives and new ways of looking at things. First of all, it created linkages between formal and informal sector. Because if you thought formal sector, when you are close, they had to get things delivered and so on. So all these people with motorcycles and so on got integrated and new ways. And one of the things, obviously, we worry about is that we see productivity is very high in formal sector and very low in informal sectors. And it's when you start creating, because you have kind of a dual economy currently. But COVID started creating this kind of starting to bridge that gap through technology. That is one important thing. And also, it also created kind of a demystified innovation, because like in Kenya, we started seeing young people start developing in ventilators and other things. Quickly, young people, universities, people came. So in a way, it demystified innovation, because sometimes we tend to think things are very complicated. The other thing, as I mentioned, there was this idea that informal sector, because of the desire to go out and so on, we started seeing them go out and look for designs and start even implementing them. So it actually just expanded perspectives. And also, it also showed also new ways of doing things. For example, obviously, robots started being displayed. I think Rwanda was using robots to do screening and so on. We also saw interesting things like in Indonesia, from other places, obviously. Indonesia was able to create very interesting public-private partnership using e-commerce platform to deliver aid to people, connecting government services together with private sector, together with which you never really see in terms of these platforms. They tend to be these are the business model. Even hotels started thinking differently, because some hotels started giving people packages where they could do the same thing in home isolation. So create new kinds of business. So I think, to me, yeah, it opened new perspectives. That was quite important.
Thank you, Julius. At the beginning, I was saying that we don't believe that we have made good justice or enough justice to the country reports. In fact, Kenya, in this particular case of the experience of links between the formal and informal sector during the COVID, it's one of the key experiences that we would like to highlight. We'll come back to you. We'll try to extract a box from your report and put it in the main report, but we'll come to you back to you to review that. Thank you. I see Peter Quarter's hand is still up, but I think that was the old hand. Anybody else? All right.
We're almost at the end of it, so.
Yeah, we're almost at the end of it. I mean, it's been good audience. We still 52 people sitting here, you know, and it shows interest. And I really wish people could post more questions, but if we don't have, I'll send it back to Ed to sort of develop some of the points that he had, and then to take it to a closure. But before returning it to Ed, I just want to say this. This is a continuous process. This is going to continue up to August 2022, but even beyond that. So, okay, Anatani is coming up with a question here. Many speakers talked about the problem. No, there is one question from Professor Uzumi Ono. Congratulations for who were engaged in these studies. I have a few questions and practical aspects. Many speakers talk about the problem of productivity as well as policy implementation. I imagine that case study countries have organizations in charge of productivity improvement. How do you evaluate their activities? How is the Minister of Industry working? Do they understand the needs of private sector? Possibly we need to think about how in capitals, aspects of policy formulation and implementation. So we need to think about the hows here. And this is what Professor Ono is asking. He's asking for now, for anybody who has an answer to contribute right now, but for us to continue to think about it. Mr. Hanatani is saying, I found some countries performed well on certain dimensions of depth during certain period and then declined. Why these changes? So why do we understand as being the factors that are behind the regression, the reversal in the progress that was being made and the disparities in the process of transformation as measured by depth? So these questions are very important. Professor Ono is from JICA Ogata Institute, and Mr. Anatani, it's one of our counterpart team leaders on the side of JICA for this project, and is also working with the Ogata Institute. Is there anybody who wants to come in and quickly contribute answers to these two questions, particularly from the countries and other policymakers who are here? The hows of the institutional arrangement and working on the technology side and productivity side, for instance.
Okay. Roberto, I think, as you said, this is a continuous process, and we would welcome, even after this event, any additional inputs that would enrich the report that is being produced. So maybe we can come to a close for this particular session of question and answers and quickly go over to wrapping up of this event. It's been quite an insightful, actively participated event. I just wanted to see whether there is any observations that the Director General would like to make before I, make a few observations for the closing of this event, or anybody from the counterpart organization. JICA. We may be having, how would I say? I think there might be some audio challenges there. But if there are none, I would just first of all like to thank all participants. But before we close, I just wanted to dwell a little bit on the observation made by Mr. James Minor about the growth with depth framework. Roberto raised the point about why the NPA, and I think in his presentation, he made a good analysis of all the various issues that are confronting Africa, from the geopolitical context to the mega trends, which offers a cogent explanation for why the ongoing, business as usual is not on, and we need to really shift our thinking to aggressively pursue economic transformation. So I think the argument for why an NPA is well, justified and documented in the various analytical work, and as well as the overall report that we have presented. The question of what is the NPA, or what should the NPA include? And I think this is where there has been a lot of rich information, but we need to articulate it in ways that would allow governments and, of course, the donors to focus on what really counts. And I think what we've done with this study is to underpin the challenges of economic transformation by defining what we see as economic transformation. There has to be growth, of course, but growth is not sufficient, and we see that already. And when we then take the depth dimensions, the indicators, for all the countries, it is clear that they are not performing well since 2010 or 2015, and that these countries are not resilient to the external shocks. And it is clear from the classification, the country classifications that we presented, that Roberto presented, that countries that are performing better on the transformation trajectory are more resilient and less likely to be affected by the external shocks. The duration of when the buckle and the recovery levels are much shorter. There is a graph which is there which shows this difference between the high performers. Even these high performers are still very low because they are below 40 in the index rating of 0 to 100. Now, it would seem to us that one of the strategic focus of the NPA is to take each of these depth indicators and to examine the extent to which there is progress or not in each of these indicators across the countries, and tease out, and we'll tease out what the policy recommendations are. For example, for diversification, Professor Texan just talked about the issues about diversification, particularly where the emphasis is on just within sector diversification, particularly at the primary production level, as opposed to diversification moving up the value add and seeing the extent to which productivity growth is driving economic transformation. Roberto also raised a very important issue in the presentation, the big gap between productivity, which has not been improving, and technological upgrading. It shows and it reconfirms the fact that there is a mismatch between skills and the required jobs in the market, the nature of technology evolving. Many of the technologies also that are evolving are mainly driven by Western labor-saving technologies. Julius mentioned the fact that there are innovative, local, appropriate technologies that are evolving, which is a response to the COVID. These are issues that needs to come into the picture in describing them. But more importantly also, we need to also have policies under the NPA that is targeting competitiveness, particularly export competitiveness. And here the objective is not just to be, to be export oriented, but export competitiveness offers us a benchmark for the kinds of industries that we need in order to be globally competitive within the value chain. So it is not just focused on export drive to improve our current account situation in the macroeconomic fundamentals, but they are focused on providing that standard critical for the countries to begin, the SMEs in the countries to begin to become competitive. I've talked about productivity. Roberto made a very good and poignant argument about labor productivity. We've talked about technology. But more importantly, we see that all these variables are going to affect human well-being. Income, the Gini coefficient, the distribution of income, the formal employment, particularly knowing very well the importance of female labor participation as a major economic driver and a transforming indicator for most economies. So I would hope that as we develop and provide policy insights for the NPA, that we're using these variables to try and drive the conversation. Because for governments, if I were a president and I am trying to transform my economy, I'm going to be asking my lieutenants, how well are we diversified? In what form? Give me the evidence. And these indicators, diversification is very well defined. Are we export competitive? We have defined it well. Our productivity improving in agriculture, manufacturing, and services? And how are we adapting technologies to ensure that we can transform our economies? So I think that what we bring in, the analysis that have been done at the country level to really articulate some of these challenges offers an interesting guidance for the new agenda, for the new policy agenda. And I hope that we will be able to articulate that in the policy agenda so that at least the conversation at TICAD 8 in Tunisia would be focusing on these drivers of economic transformation. So I just want again to thank you all for participating in this conversation. And we had at some point about 60 participants, and we still have almost 50 still in the conversation. So thank you all for coming, and thanks to the country, our country counterparts that did an excellent job in the presentation, and also our panelists, and also to JICA for giving us this opportunity to exchange views and to contribute to the Japanese policy agenda in Africa. I hope you all had a very fruitful conversation, and I look forward to continuation. As Roberto said, this is going to go beyond TICAD. We need to build a community of practice among all these countries and even expand to other countries. So thanks everyone again for the participation, and look forward to hearing from you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.